BioCentury This Week is brought to you by Voyager Therapeutics. Voyager Therapeutics is dedicated to leveraging the power of human genetics to modify the course of and ultimately cure neurological diseases. Voyager addresses the challenge of delivering novel treatments to the brain through the company's innovative Tracer AAV capsid discovery platform, as well as Voyager's NeuroShuttle, a non-viral delivery platform designed to transport multiple modalities of neurotherapeutics across the blood-brain barrier. The company's programs address diseases with substantial unmet needs, including Alzheimer's disease, Friedreich's ataxia, Parkinson's disease, ALS, and other diseases of the central nervous system.
Pfizer has won the bidding war for Metsera. What can we learn from the week-long wrangling between Pfizer and Novo for Metsera and what it means for cross-border M&A? Staying with obesity, a pair of Amylin data sets made for an interesting ObesityWeek in Atlanta. Plus, Jim Wilson, he is rethinking the funding model for ultra-rare therapies. Plus, more leadership turmoil at FDA as Richard Pazder declines the CEDAR job. But what's FDA going to look like moving forward? I'm Jeff Cranmer, and this is the BioCentury This Week podcast. Joining me are my colleagues
Simon Fishburne, Editor-in-Chief.
Stephen Hansen, Director of Biopharma Intelligence.
Lauren Martz, Executive Director of Biopharma Intelligence.
And Steve Usden, Washington Editor.
All right, guys, thanks for joining me. You all have quite different things to talk about. Stephen, I guess maybe you're glad that this week-long bidding war is over. Where did the ball bounce?
Yeah, I think so. It's been quite a wild week. So if you heard last week's podcast, we talked about this fairly extensively. But if you recall, Pfizer was set to acquire Metsera in a deal they announced in late September. And then on October 30th, Novo came in with a rival bid to acquire Metsera. And sort of the bidding war started from there. In the intervening period, we had Pfizer suing Novo and suing Metsera for breach of contract. There was talk about America First and these sorts of things. There's all this sort of drama that was happening in between. But kind of where it all landed was over the weekend, Pfizer announced that it had again increased its bid for Metsera to what amounted to $7.6 billion up front, plus a CVR worth up to $2.4 billion. So overall, $10 billion. That basically equaled what Novo's final bid had been. And then Novo announced over the weekend that it was basically pulling out, that it was no longer going to offer any new bids. So kind of where things stand is now Pfizer, Metsera are now looking to go forward for a $10 billion overall acquisition price on Metsera, rather than the roughly 7.5 is kind of where it stood before Novo got involved. So quite the sweetened deal from where things stood.
I'm wondering how much, you mentioned the America First thing. I'm really curious, how much do you think that played into it? How much did the FTC's intervention in making it seem like the Novo bid was going to be disadvantaged compared to Pfizer?
Let me answer that.
Was that dispositive?
The answer's a ton. Okay. so Stephen and I have been talking about this. I think it is not possible to look at this course of events. We know they said that FTC basically called up Metsera and said, this offer is questionable. Novo, even the offer of money up front, might get reversed. I believe this was done while the government shutdown was still on. There's clearly a lot of FTC hand in this. All I can say is Lena Khan could have done this herself.
So the question I guess that has going forward is this one-off? It seems like these things are never one-off. People always say they're going to be one-off, but I think that people are going to have to think about this when you're talking about these kinds of deals going forward for the remainder of this administration.
Well, Stephen, I know you want to come into this, but I want to add to that. I mean, there's that generally, but that's what you're calling the America First thing, Steve. But, you've got Baller having cozied up to Trump. But there's another part of this, which, Stephen, maybe you can talk about, which is whether other obesity companies should be thinking, I'm not going to be able to partner with Lilly or Novo.
Yeah, so here's what I think. I think there was a clear argument that this would have breached the antitrust laws in the U.S. I mean, I think for one sense, I think that's exactly why Novo chose to pursue such a unique deal structure, was because they probably knew this was going to be very hard to get through. And so why they went after this, very unique structure that would put so much money up front. Secondly, I mean, Novo itself reports that they hold 48% of the market share for the GLP-1 market in the US in diabetes. And based on sales of Lilly's drugs, I'm pretty confident that we can say that Lilly probably holds another 48% in the US. And so when you look at definitions of dominant market position in antitrust legislation, I think this clearly fits. When you're talking about GLP-1s, I think Metsera and Novo kind of clearly fit into that dominant market position argument. And so I actually think Pfizer had a pretty good case to say that this wasn't going to make it by. And so while I think it's very convenient that Novo was a Danish company for Borla in terms of using that America First argument, I would argue that if you took Novo out and you inserted Lilly, I think the FTC would have had a similar approach here. I don't think Lilly could have gotten this deal done with Metsera with the same deal structure. I think the America First helped just from a optics kind of being able to lean on them and maybe to get it done a little bit quicker. But I think just from an antitrust perspective, I think both Lilly and
Stephen,
Novo
what about the
would have had a hard time getting this deal
what about
done.
the argument that I've read in the journal and in my own Slack messages to you about the number of other farmers with activity in this space? You've got Amgen, and you can name them, and this is a molecule that's not yet on the market. So,
that's true. And you know what? I think in 5 years' time, you probably could easily make the argument that Novo could buy a next-gen GLP-1 and probably be in a position to do that, because there would be 4 or 5 other GLP-1s out there, and they wouldn't have as dominant a position. But I think at this point in time, a few conversations I've had with some M&A lawyers as well, they think there's a pretty strong argument to say that as of right now, Novo has that dominant position, and therefore, when you're talking about GLP-1s, this would be a hard one to push forward with. Doesn't mean to say they can't do deals elsewhere. We've seen Lilly do, and Novo obviously do deals in obesity. Novo bought, CB1 inhibitor, which was a different molecule, different class. Lilly's done deals for bimagrumab, which is sort of the activin antibody. So there are deals to be done. I just think very narrowly in this GLP-1 class, this is one where it would be harder to push forward from an antitrust position.
Last thing then.
That's my perspective.
If they had this strong antitrust position, were sure of it, and actually got that verified by Metsera in their announcement, why did they have to up the bid? That's Pfizer. Why did Pfizer up the bid?
I've been thinking about this since you originally put this to me earlier. I think the reason you up the bid is because you take the decision out of Metsera's hands. When you match Novo's offer and you have the clear runway from a regulatory perspective, there's no decision to be made by Metsera's board. It's clearly the better offer to take. I think if you try to go in with a lower offer, you make it much harder on Metsera to decide. And so I think Pfizer's board was just finally like, you know what, whatever, just up the offer, make it an offer they can, this is like the Godfather offer, make them an offer they can't refuse, and let's just move on with it.
All right. So I think that we can agree that basically they listened to our podcast last week and decided what's another billion between friends. And I also agree with you that from Metsera's point of view, it makes complete sense.
That's right.
All righty. Thanks for that, Stephen. You were certainly on top of that. We didn't get you out of bed for anything, but you sort of waited to make your next story, make your next move. Okay, well, Lilly sat on the sidelines of the Metsera madness, but it was making its mark in Hotlanta for Obesity Week, which wrapped up on Friday. SITC fans, we know you're out there. We'll get to you next week. But we're going to stay with the obesity theme here. Lilly set the bar for Amylin with weight loss data, but we also saw 2 data sets that called into question the quality of weight loss and how folks were thinking about it for Amylin. Stephen, break this down for us.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jeff. So as you mentioned, this past week was Obesity Week for those that aren't, I guess, big on nightclubs and things in Atlanta, Georgia. And yeah, I guess the most impressive data out of the conference from my perspective was the eloralintide data from Lilly. It is an amylin receptor biased agonist, and it was pretty impressive. So this was 48-week data. We already kind of knew that this molecule was pretty good because at ADA earlier this year, we saw 12-week data that showed 11.5% weight loss. And now the 48-week data showed nearly 20% placebo-adjusted weight loss. I mean, that's pretty much on par with Lilly's tirzepatide, so very impressive data. And then on the safety side, I mean, across all the doses, it looked better than what we would typically see with an incretin. But then when they had a titration cohort that showed weight loss of up to 16%, I mean, the GI side effects were very mild, just a few percentage points above what they were seeing with placebo. So it was a very promising sort of profile for that program. To get what you were saying, Jeff, about the weight loss quality. So people had previously, been telling me that amylin monotherapy could reach kind of the high teens in terms of weight loss. But I was always kind of skeptical of that. That was primarily because everyone had been talking about this preclinical data that they'd seen for amylin and how that weight loss was predominantly driven by fat mass loss and that it was a muscle sparing mechanism and all these things. And sort of by definition, if you're only losing weight from fat and not other parts of lean mass, well, it's just harder to lose more than what you would typically see with the GLP-1. So I was always quite skeptical of the idea that you could get kind of GLP-1-like weight loss from an amylin monotherapy. Well, now we know why we can see this size of weight loss is because we got data for CagriSema from their Redefine 1 phase 3 study, where they also have cagrilintide and semaglutide monotherapy arms. And when they looked at body composition, essentially there was no difference in weight loss between the amylin and the GLP-1. Actually, in that trial, there was a bit more weight loss from fat for semaglutide than there was from the amylin arm of that study. And then on top of that, for the eloralintide data, they also had a body composition subset of the data. And that also showed basically weight loss where you get 60 to 70% weight loss from fat and then around 30 to 40% from lean mass, which again is basically what we would expect to see from an incretin-based therapy. So it's essentially two fairly sizable knocks against amylin being a muscle-sparing mechanism, which was one of the potential benefits of this class in terms of it being able to, be a core obesity therapy going forward. So right now, the way I would think about it is unless we see data otherwise, I'm sort of in my mind, I'm kind of removing that muscle sparing benefit from amylin. But I mean, the rest of the data still looks great. It still is GLP-1 like weight loss with better side effect profile. I think there's still a real role for amylin to play as a core obesity treatment. But as of right now, I think we have to cut out the muscle sparing mechanism.
Well, thanks for the update, Stephen. What's next for you? What are you watching for?
Well, we're going to have a look at, there was some NLRP3 data in obesity recently, so I'm going to take a bit of a deeper dive into that and kind of where things stand. And then who knows? I'm sure there's plenty of directions that we can go from there. So
thanks for that, Stephen. I'm looking forward to that piece for sure. All right, enjoy your evening. Suspect it's dinner time for you right now. Well, let's turn to Lauren. Lauren had the pleasure of speaking to Jim Wilson recently, and she wrote about what he has been up to since he left Penn. And, she found FDA has been trying to find ways to ease the regulatory path for ultra-rare disease drugs. VCs not really taking the bait just yet, largely uninterested in the space. And so that sort of set the stage for Jim Wilson as he set out to develop and fund gene therapies for ultra-orphan indications. Little more than a year in, the hurdles he encountered prompted him to rethink the funding model to keep his mission alive. Lauren, what did you learn?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So a few weeks ago, we learned that Jim Wilson, who left his longstanding position at Penn to found Gemma Therapeutics, was launching a new company focused on AAV gene therapies for ultra-rare diseases called Rare Therapeutics. So ultra-rare diseases were really at the center of the mission of Gemma, which launched a year ago when he left Penn. I spoke with Jim Wilson about, why he was launching this new company that was focused on what I thought the original company was focused on. And he was very transparent. As you said, there was a lack of interest from the VCs that he approached in funding the ultra-orphan programs that he was trying to develop. So the whole idea behind Gemma was that the company would license later stage gene therapies for ultra-orphan diseases that wouldn't require very much investment to get to the first approvals. Then the company would use the priority review vouchers and whatever sales were generated to fund future programs. this did require some VC funding, especially at the beginning. And interest from VC simply wasn't there. That's, of course, something that we've been observing when we've been talking about gene therapy development over the course of this year and many years before that. Interest in gene therapy in general is declining for various reasons. There just isn't really a line of sight to how to make these types of therapies for the rarest diseases something that people think can be very profitable. The outcome is that Gemma Therapeutics is sticking with its earlier stage programs for the less rare diseases in order to get VC backing. And then the ultra-rare programs were spun out into this new company, Rare Therapeutics.
How much of this is a consequence of the sunsetting of the priority review voucher, and how important would it be if the priority review voucher came back?
So that was a core part of the original model. There is this expectation that those programs, when approved, would get priority review vouchers. That was just built into the funding model. And so without that, I think that is a big component to why this may not have worked. Developing these ultra-rare programs really does depend on the government, the FDA regulatory incentive. So there were the priority review vouchers, which, we still have vouchers. They're not as predictable. They're not going to be, or they may not be for these types of indications as we've seen so far.
They call them vouchers. They're not vouchers because
Sure.
They can't be transferred. They can't be sold. The key thing about the priority review voucher wasn't that it sped up the development program, which is what the new commissioner, National Priority Voucher, is supposed to do. The key thing about that was that they were, Willy Wonka's magic ticket. You could transfer them or you could sell them for, north of $100 million usually. That's a powerful incentive for developing these kinds of drugs. In the absence of that, it's going to be a struggle to see how companies are going to be able to come up with the investment to do it.
Exactly. I think this is a demonstration of that. And I think there are sort of other incentives that this was depending on. So there's also this platform technology designation, which we have been seeing rollouts. There have been 2 companies at this point that have received this designation. But again, that's something that's unpredictable. So the idea there is that if you have a therapy approved based on an underlying platform technology, here it would be the same AAV vector. There would be fewer requirements, you don't have to repeat some of the requirements, and that would streamline development and cut the costs. And so again, that's something, there's not a ton of certainty around when that can be available and if it will be available. When I spoke with Jim Wilson, he also cited some potentially more reliable incentives. There's the Rare Disease Evidence Principles Program, which is focused specifically on the ultra-rare diseases, and that's where Rare Therapeutics is focused. So I think this is a story that we'll continue to follow as an example of how regulatory incentives can impact development of gene therapies for rare and ultra-rare diseases. And
we're also going to be seeing the plausible mechanism pathway, at least that's what it's been called to date, some kind of a new pathway that FDA is creating for ultra-rare diseases that's going to be announced, I think, probably this week, but if not this week, then next week.
Okay, thanks for that, Lauren. Lauren specializes in covering gene therapy, new modalities, and she'll stay on top of this space for us. And you can read her piece at biocenturypodcast.com, and I'll drop a link to the show notes. And speaking of the show notes, while you're checking those out, don't forget to like and subscribe BioCentury This Week, and check out our sister podcast, The BioCentury Show. Steve, you are looking very dapper today. You've got a green screen behind you. What's on your agenda?
Yeah, I dressed up just for the podcast so people can hear me what I sound like in a suit. No, I'm going to be doing an interview later this afternoon with former NIH director and former head of R&D at Sanofi, Elias Zerhouni.
All right, I'm looking forward to that. Yes, Simone did announce a new editorial policy where one of us has to wear a suit every day. So
I'm excited to see how this plays out.
Yeah, me too. I mean, today Eagles attire, big Monday night game. But hey, we're gonna get back to Steve and what's happening in Washington right after this.
BioCentury This Week is brought to you by the 5th East-West Biopharma Summit in South Korea. An arc of innovation is emerging across Asia, and Western biopharma leaders are taking note, from cross-border deals to new co's. In March 2026, the 5th BioCentury Bay Helix East-West Biopharma Summit visits South Korea for the first time. Meet the biopharma leaders putting Korea innovation on the global map. Learn why Korea has become a clinical trial and manufacturing hub. Discover if Korea is the next hotspot for new co-formation. Plus meet biopharma innovators from India to Singapore to China and Japan. Register now at biocenturyeastwest.com.
And I have already begun recruiting presenting companies for the East-West Summit. You can register now to be a delegate. Take advantage of that early bird rate. You'll want to lock in your schedule. Once JP Morgan happens, we know how that is. It's hold on to your hats. All right, Steve, FDA Commissioner Marty Makary, as you reported last week, had asked Richard Pazder to serve as CDER director in the wake of George Tidmarsh's ouster. We talked about that on last week's pod, so we won't need to dwell on the things around that, but you can check out last week's pod, get caught up. What is going on with leadership at FDA right now?
Well, so here's what we know. When we're talking about CDER, we know, and as I mentioned last week, George Tidmarsh is not coming back. Yeah, FDA Commissioner Makary asked Oncology Center of Excellence Director Richard Pazder to take the job. HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. interviewed Pazder. And I think it's important to point out that this is unprecedented. It's unprecedented for an HHS secretary to vet an FDA center director. So here's what I think. I think the job of the center director has become politicized. In the best of times, it's a really difficult job. And in the current administration, it has become much more difficult. Whoever takes the position will have to be aligned with Kennedy's MAHA movement. They're going to have to be willing to accept political interference in routine regulatory decisions. And they're going to have to understand that they may not last longer than the current administration. Previous CDER directors and CBER directors have had the confidence that since they're civil servants, that they will stay in the position for a lengthy period of time. I'm not convinced that that's the case now. And whoever comes into the job is going to have to deal with plummeting morale, depleted staffing, and kind of toxic pandemic politics. So it's going to be tough to find somebody to do the job who will do it with the same kind of expertise and the same kind of excellence as previous CDER directors have done it. And you can't really emphasize how important for the biopharma industry and for patients the CDER director role is. In many ways, it's more important than the FDA commissioner.
So, Steve, obviously there was Janet Woodcock for a very long time, then Patrizia Cavazzoni. Janet was there for so long, Dr. Woodcock, that I'm not actually sure, to be honest, Steve, I don't remember who was before her. I'm sort of wondering whether there isn't scope. I mean, if there were somebody good and competent, is there not scope for somebody to think I have to survive 1 year, 2 year, 3 years in this? How much does somebody think about just survival in a role like that versus walking in with an agenda, I'm really going to do, big things? I think that's one of my concerns is the risk aversion that people at FDA will have, despite many things that Makary is talking about in terms of making drug development easier. There seems to be a concern about sticking your head out.
Yeah, so look, I think that whoever comes into this position is going to have to come into the position realizing all the things that I mentioned earlier, and they're going to have to be comfortable with that. It's going to have to be somebody who's comfortable in a more politicized environment, in an environment where the HHS secretary can decide that Tylenol is no longer safe for pregnant women or for children without any kind of process around it that is normal, or that leucovorin is an effective treatment for autism. There's going to be more and more of those things. So whoever comes into the position is going to have to be comfortable dealing with that environment. What does that mean? Yeah, one of the things that we're going to see, regardless of who's the CDER director going forward, is we're going to see more risk aversion, we're going to see less predictability, and we're going to see more erratic decision-making. And by erratic decision-making, I mean decisions that are made, then there's political blowback and FDA changing its mind. There have been several instances of that already in this administration, and I think we're going to see more. There's quite a bit of concern about some of the complete response letters that have been issued in recent weeks and months. The patient groups and the companies and the investors are organizing political responses to try to pressure FDA to reverse the complete responses or to find paths forward to get some of those drugs out to patients. So I think that's the kind of thing that we're going to see. And, as I wrote this big piece last week, kind of trying to look forward at what FDA is going to be like in the future. And those were some of the themes, risk aversion, erratic decision-making, less predictability. At the same time, there's a really dedicated staff there, in many cases, people who have been there for a decade or more, who are going to do their utmost to keep the ship, going, to keep the ship afloat and going in the right direction. So there are going to be a lot of things that are going to happen, relationships and interactions, engagements between companies, sponsors, and FDA that are going to move forward just as they should and as they have in the past. The problem, I think, among other problems, is that it's unpredictable when things will blow off course. Everything can be going along just as you expect, and then for some reason, things aren't going along the way that you expect anymore. That's got to be in the back of everybody's mind.
All right. Thanks for that update, Steve. Yeah, definitely much gratitude to those people keeping the light on, moving applications, giving companies advice. We need it. For those of you doing that, hang in there. Okay, well, don't forget to turn into the BioCentury show this week. We'll also have another special pod for you. Simone and Josh were up in Boston at the Venture Cafe Cambridge last week. A really good podcast focused on all things Korea. One can only hope that Josh has finally seen K-pop Demon Hunters. I know Simone lives it, basically. So
it is on my to-do
like and
list.
subscribe
it is on
us.
my to-do list. I have to tell you, my husband cannot believe it is on my to-do list, but it is. Just as soon as I finish Shogun.
Great.
Finish Shogun.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to check that one out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you got some plane rides ahead of you, so hopefully you can make some headway on both fronts. Okay. Thanks for tuning in. We will catch you for our regular pod next week. Kendall Square Orchestra provides the music for BioCentury's podcasts. Tickets are now on sale for the group's 8th season. The group connects science and technology professionals and other members of the greater Boston community to collaborate, innovate, and inspire through music while supporting causes related to healthcare and education.
BioCentury would like to thank Voyager Therapeutics for supporting the BioCentury This Week podcast. To learn more about Voyager's programs advancing transformative medicines for neurological diseases, visit VoyagerTherapeutics.com.